10 Golden Age stars who were told they were too ugly to succeed. In the glittering dream factory of old Hollywood, beauty was supposed to be the ultimate currency. Studio executives, casting directors, and producers wielded brutal honesty like a weapon, crushing dreams with casual cruelty. Too fat, too ethnic, your eyes are too wide, your nose is too big, your face will never work on film. Yet somehow, against impossible odds and vicious rejection, a handful of extraordinary talents refused to let these devastating judgments define them. Today, we're revealing the shocking, sometimes heartbreaking stories of 10 legendary stars who were told in no uncertain terms that they were simply too ugly for Hollywood.
Tell me who those directors are and why.
The most fortunate thing in my life is having great directors.
10. Shelley Winters. Too plain for the screen. When young Shelley Winters arrived in Hollywood in the early 1940s, she was immediately pigeonholed by studio executives who saw her as the antithesis of star material. With her rounded features, voluptuous figure, and distinctly ethnic appearance at a time when Nordic blondes ruled the screen, Winters was bluntly informed that she would never be leading lady material. The casting director at Columbia Pictures looked me up and down and said, "Honey, you'd better learn to type," Winters later recalled. He told me my face was too round, my figure too full, and my look too everyday for audiences to accept me as anything but background. This brutal assessment wasn't isolated. Throughout her early career, Winters was repeatedly told to lose weight, change her hair, and consider plastic surgery to reshape her face into something more aligned with Hollywood's narrow beauty standards. One producer infamously told her, "We have enough Jewish-looking girls serving coffee in the commissary. We don't need them on camera." What these short-sighted executives failed to recognize was that Winters possessed not just extraordinary acting talent, but a raw authenticity that would eventually connect with audiences in a profound way. Instead of trying to transform herself into another studio-manufactured beauty, Winters chose to leverage her ordinary qualities into something extraordinary. Her breakthrough came in 1947's A Double Life, where she played a waitress who becomes the victim of an actor losing himself in his role as Othello. The part required an actress who could convey vulnerability, sensuality, and gritty realism, qualities that Winters possessed in abundance and that a more conventionally beautiful actress might have struggled to embody convincingly. "They kept telling me to fix my face and lose 20 pounds, Winters said of this period. "I decided instead to perfect my craft and develop my own style. If I couldn't be Lana Turner, I'd be the best Shelley Winters possible." This decision proved revolutionary. Rather than fading into obscurity as predicted, Winters went on to win 2 Academy Awards for The Diary of Anne Frank and A Patch of Blue, and 2 additional nominations. As her career progressed, she deliberately moved away from attempting to fit Hollywood's beauty mold, instead embracing roles that required emotional depth, complexity, and occasionally physical transformation. In The Poseidon Adventure, one of her most famous roles, Winters, by then in her 50s and considerably heavier than in her youth, performed her own underwater stunts and created one of the most memorable characters in disaster film history. The former swimming champion she portrayed required an actress completely comfortable with her body and appearance, without the vanity that might have hampered a conventional beauty in the role. Constantly told to lose weight and fix her face, Winters instead refused to conform, and in doing so, created a career that spanned 6 decades and left an indelible mark on cinema. Her journey from rejection to acclaim demonstrated that audiences could connect deeply with an actress who looked more like them than like a fantasy, an insight that gradually but fundamentally changed Hollywood's understanding of who could become a star. As Winters herself reflected later in life, "They told me I was too plain for the screen, until I blew it wide open with performances they couldn't ignore. Turns out being real was my superpower all along."
He said, "Man, that sure is some good-looking stagecoach." That's what they call a motorhome.
9. Ernest Borgnine, the anti-leading man. When Ernest Borgnine first arrived in Hollywood in the early 1950s, his prospects seemed limited at best. Short, stocky, with a gap-toothed smile, and a face that one casting director described as looking like it had been rearranged in a bar fight, Borgnine was the antithesis of the classical leading men of the era like Cary Grant or Gregory Peck. "The first agent who saw me actually laughed out loud," Borgnine recalled years later. He said, "With a mug like that, kid, you'd better hope they need someone to play a thug who gets killed in the first reel." This harsh assessment wasn't far from how Borgnine's career actually began. His first significant role came in From Here to Eternity, 1953, where he played the sadistic Sergeant Fatso Judson, a character so unlikable that Borgnine reported receiving angry letters and even threats from viewers who couldn't separate the actor from his role. It seemed that Hollywood had firmly decided Borgnine's fate. He would be forever cast as villains, thugs, and heavies, characters whose unpleasant appearance matched their unpleasant actions. With his heavy brow, wide nose, and stocky build, he was considered far too ordinary-looking to ever carry a film or play a sympathetic lead. Then came Marty. The 1955 film about a lonely Bronx butcher looking for love required something revolutionary for its time. A leading man who looked like an actual person rather than a movie star. When Borgnine read the script, he recognized immediately that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, a chance to prove that audiences could connect emotionally with a protagonist who wasn't conventionally handsome. They wanted someone real, someone audiences would believe had been rejected and overlooked because of his appearance, Borgnine explained. I walked into that audition knowing I was Marty. I'd lived with those insecurities about my looks my whole life. His performance was nothing short of revelatory, bringing depth, tenderness, and authentic vulnerability to the role. Borgnine created a character so relatable and human that audiences and critics alike were mesmerized. The film won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and, in a stunning rebuke to every casting director who had dismissed him as too ugly for leading roles, Best Actor for Borgnine. In his acceptance speech, Borgnine made an oblique reference to his unlikely journey. I just want to thank my mother for giving me a face only a mother could love. What made Borgnine's triumph particularly significant was how it challenged Hollywood's fundamental assumptions about audience psychology. Conventional wisdom held that moviegoers wanted to see beautiful people falling in love, not ordinary-looking folks finding connection. Marty proved this premise wrong, demonstrating that authenticity and emotional truth could resonate more powerfully than physical perfection. Following this breakthrough, Borgnine enjoyed one of the longest and most diverse careers in Hollywood history, spanning more than 6 decades. While he never became a conventional romantic lead, he built a remarkable body of work across genres, from westerns like The Wild Bunch, to comedies like McHale's Navy, to disaster films like The Poseidon Adventure. Hollywood said, "No way." The Oscars said otherwise, remarked film historian Robert Thompson. Borgnine's career proved that genuine talent and charisma could transcend conventional beauty standards. He opened doors for a whole generation of character actors to become leading men. Perhaps the most telling testament to Borgnine's impact came from director Delbert Mann, who cast him in Marty. Years later, Mann admitted, "We interviewed dozens of actors who were trying to ugly themselves up for the role. Ernest was the only one who walked in completely comfortable in his own skin, without apology or affectation. That authenticity is what made him a star." In defying Hollywood's beauty standards, Borgnine didn't just build an impressive career. He helped expand the very definition of who could be a leading man, paving the way for future unconventional stars, from Jack Nicholson to Philip Seymour Hoffman.
You're in love with her, and you want to win her back. First thing you gotta do is to get her to talk to you.
8. Thelma Ritter. From stock character to scene stealer. In an industry obsessed with youthful beauty, Thelma Ritter never had a chance at conventional stardom. She didn't even begin her film career until she was 46 years old, an age when many actresses were already being pushed into retirement. With her plain, lived-in face, stocky figure, and distinctly working-class New York accent, Ritter possessed none of the qualities Hollywood typically required of its female stars. When I first got to Hollywood, a producer took one look at me and said, "Honey, we already have enough cleaning ladies working in the studio," Ritter once recalled. He didn't realize I was there to audition, not to push a mop. This dismissive attitude reflected Hollywood's limited vision of where a woman with Ritter's appearance could fit into the cinematic landscape. At best, she might hope for bit parts as maids, nurses, or neighborhood gossips. Background characters who existed primarily to serve the stories of the beautiful people in the foreground. Indeed, Ritter's film debut in the 1947 Miracle on 34th Street was exactly such a role, a harried mother shopping at Macy's with just a few lines of dialogue. But something remarkable happened in that brief screen time. Ritter's authentic, no-nonsense delivery and perfect comic timing caught the attention of both audiences and industry insiders. What was meant to be a forgettable bit part became a memorable moment. Director Joseph L. Mankiewicz was among those who noticed Ritter's scene-stealing capabilities. He cast her as the straight-talking maid in A Letter to Three Wives, 1949, giving her slightly more screen time. Once again, Ritter made such an impression that Mankiewicz immediately wrote a larger role for her in his next film, the classic All About Eve, 1950. As Birdie, the maid who sees through Eve's manipulations before anyone else, Ritter delivered a performance so vibrant and truthful that she accomplished something previously thought impossible. She earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress, despite looking nothing like a typical Hollywood star. Not glamorous, not graceful, just real, is how film historian David Thompson described Ritter's appeal. She was never a starlet, but always stole the scene. This first nomination would be followed by 5 more throughout her career, making Ritter the most nominated actress never to win an Oscar. While this might seem like faint praise, it actually represents an extraordinary triumph over Hollywood's beauty bias. In an era when cameras and lighting were still optimized for conventionally attractive faces, Ritter's talent was so undeniable that it repeatedly overcame the industry's superficial standards. What's particularly remarkable about Ritter's career is how she transformed what could have been limiting character actress roles into scene-stealing showcases. In films like Rear Window, Pillow Talk, and The Misfits, she frequently upstaged some of Hollywood's most beautiful stars, not by competing with their glamour, but by providing such authentic emotional grounding that audiences were naturally drawn to her performances. They cast me as the maid, the secretary, the neighbor, the best friend, Ritter once observed. Never the beauty, never the ingenue, but I discovered something. Audiences remember the truth more than they remember the prettiest face, and truth was something I could deliver. This insight proved prophetic. While many of her more conventionally attractive contemporaries faded from public memory, Ritter's performances remain vibrantly alive decades after her death. Her 6th and final Oscar nomination came for Birdman of Alcatraz, 1962, a dramatic departure from her usual comic roles that demonstrated her remarkable range. She was never a starlet, but always stole the scene, noted director Billy Wilder, who worked with Ritter on The Misfits. Thelma could do more with a raised eyebrow or a skeptical glance than most actresses could do with a monologue. The camera loved her, not because she was beautiful in the conventional sense, but because she was authentic in a way nobody could fake. In an industry built on illusion and fantasy, Thelma Ritter's greatest asset was her unvarnished reality. By embracing rather than disguising the very qualities that should have disqualified her from stardom, she carved out a singular place in cinema history and proved that audiences hunger for authenticity as much as beauty, a legacy that continues to influence character actors to this day.
It's funny, depends on your taste. I have a sick sense of humor, so a lot of my humor kind of goes like this to people. But
7. Whoopi Goldberg. They judged the face, not the fire. Though Whoopi Goldberg's major breakthrough came in the 1980s, technically after Hollywood's golden age had ended, her story represents a crucial bridge between old Hollywood's rigid beauty standards and the more inclusive industry still emerging today. Her journey illustrates how the same prejudices that limited opportunities for unconventional-looking actors in the studio era continued well into the modern period. When Goldberg first pursued an acting career, the feedback was brutally consistent. She was not pretty enough for television. With her dreadlocks, gap-toothed smile, and distinctly non-European features, Goldberg faced rejection after rejection from an industry still operating largely on Golden Age beauty principles. I had an agent actually tell me, "Look, I don't know what to do with you. You're not pretty enough to be a leading lady, not ugly enough to be a character actress," Goldberg revealed in a later interview. It was like I existed in this in-between space they had no category for. This assessment was particularly telling. Hollywood had established rigid categories for black actresses that Goldberg simply didn't fit. She wasn't conventionally beautiful enough for romantic leads, which were rarely offered to black actresses anyway, nor did she fit the stereotypical mammy or domestic worker roles that had been the primary opportunities for black women since Hattie McDaniel's days. Rather than try to conform to these limiting standards, Goldberg took an unprecedented path. She created her own opportunity by developing a one-woman Broadway show featuring multiple characters she had created. The show's extraordinary success caught the attention of director Steven Spielberg, who was preparing to adapt Alice Walker's The Color Purple. Casting Goldberg as Sei Lee, a character described in the novel as ugly and unattractive, was still considered a major risk. Studio executives pushed for a more conventionally attractive actress, concerned that audiences wouldn't connect with a protagonist who didn't meet traditional beauty standards. Spielberg held firm, recognizing that Goldberg's expressive face and extraordinary emotional range were exactly what the character required. "They judged the face, not the fire," observed film critic Roger Ebert after seeing Goldberg's performance, which earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. What Hollywood failed to understand is that her face is remarkable precisely because it's so expressive, so human, so capable of conveying emotion that perfect features often mask. This breakthrough role should have opened doors for Goldberg to play a wide range of complex characters. Instead, Hollywood still struggled to see beyond her unconventional appearance. Despite her obvious talent, she was frequently offered stereotypical roles or parts where her appearance was treated as comedic rather than simply human. The turning point came with Ghost, 1990, where Goldberg's performance as psychic Oda Mae Brown won her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, making her only the second black woman in history to win an Oscar nearly 50 years after Hattie McDaniel. This triumph, followed by the commercial success of Sister Act, finally forced Hollywood to recognize Goldberg's extraordinary appeal to mainstream audiences despite her nonconformity to traditional beauty standards. What makes Goldberg's story particularly relevant to our exploration of Golden Age beauty standards is how it demonstrates both how much and how little had changed in Hollywood's approach to appearance. While the rigid studio system had dissolved, many of its prejudices about what a star should look like remained firmly entrenched. By eventually achieving the coveted EGOT status, winning Emmy, Grammy, Oscar, and Tony Awards, Goldberg delivered perhaps the most definitive rebuke to every casting director who had deemed her not pretty enough for TV. Her triumph wasn't just personal, it helped expand opportunities for actors whose distinctive looks might previously have limited their careers. "Hollywood wanted me to fit into a box that didn't exist," Goldberg reflected years later. "So I built my own box. And it turned out audiences were a lot more interested in what was inside it than the package it came in."
Vaguely.
Yeah, I'm a private dick on a case. Perhaps I'm asking too much, although it doesn't...
6. Humphrey Bogart, the rat-faced legend. Today, it's almost impossible to imagine cinema without Humphrey Bogart's iconic presence. His weathered face, distinctive lisp, and world-weary charisma defined an entire archetype of American masculinity. But when Bogart first arrived in Hollywood in the early 1930s, studio executives took one look at him and saw everything a leading man shouldn't be. "They called me rat-faced to my face," Bogart later recalled of his early career struggles. "One casting director told me I had a face for radio and suggested I try my luck there instead." The criticisms weren't entirely unfounded by conventional standards. Bogart's features were unconventional at best. He had a thin, angular face, a noticeable lisp caused by a childhood injury to his upper lip, which created his distinctive speaking style, and a physique that was wiry rather than imposingly masculine. Standing 5 feet 8 inches and weighing around 150 pounds, he lacked the physical stature typically associated with leading men of the era. Most significantly, Bogart's teeth were crooked and discolored, a serious liability in the days before cosmetic dentistry was routine for actors. Studio makeup artists would later devise techniques to minimize this issue on camera, but many early screen tests focused ruthlessly on what one executive called the dental disaster. These physical shortcomings resulted in Bogart being typecast as gangsters, thugs, and villains throughout the 1930s, characters who were meant to be repellent rather than appealing. While he brought remarkable depth to these roles, particularly in films like The Petrified Forest, 1936, they were essentially dead-end parts, typically culminating in his character's death before the final reel. "I shot James Cagney, Edward G. Robinson, and a dozen others to death on screen," Bogart once quipped. "I was always the guy who got gunned down before the credits rolled. The perfect fate for someone with a face like mine, according to the studios." The turning point came through a combination of persistence, timing, and one crucial advocate. Warner Brothers had initially cast George Raft as Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon, 1941, but Raft, concerned about playing a morally ambiguous character, turned down the role. Director John Huston fought for Bogart as the replacement, believing his unconventional looks would actually enhance the character's complex nature. Huston's insight proved revolutionary. Audiences didn't recoil from Bogart's distinctive appearance. Instead, they found it compelling precisely because it didn't conform to Hollywood's bland handsomeness. His world-weary face conveyed experience and authenticity that more conventionally attractive actors often couldn't achieve. He wasn't handsome, he was unforgettable, noted film historian Janine Bassinger. What Bogart and Huston discovered together was that movie audiences respond more powerfully to distinctive faces than to conventionally perfect ones. Bogart's so-called flaws became his signature, the very things that made him instantly recognizable and emotionally credible. This revelation reached its apotheosis in Casablanca, 1942, where Bogart's Rick Blaine became one of cinema's most enduring romantic leads despite, or perhaps because of, his unconventional appearance. The film's famous final scene, where Rick sacrifices his love for the greater good, works precisely because Bogart doesn't look like a typical Hollywood hero. He looks like a real man making a painful choice. Following Casablanca, Bogart's career soared, disproving every executive who had dismissed him based on appearance. He became one of Hollywood's most bankable stars, earning an Academy Award for The African Queen, 1951, and creating a series of performances that defined American cinema in the post-war era. What makes Bogart's triumph over Hollywood's beauty standards particularly significant is how completely he inverted them. Rather than succeeding despite his unconventional looks, he ultimately succeeded because of them. His distinctive appearance became an essential part of his appeal, so much so that later actors like Woody Allen would actually imitate his mannerisms and speech patterns. As director Nicholas Ray observed after working with Bogart on In a Lonely Place, 1950, Bogey taught Hollywood an important lesson, that authenticity will always outlast beauty. A pretty face might catch the eye, but a face with character captures the imagination. In defying Hollywood's conventional wisdom about leading man appeal, Bogart didn't just build an iconic career, he expanded the possibilities for male stars who followed, proving that distinctiveness could be more powerful than traditional handsomeness.
Oh, Lucy, it's scrumptious. You'll be the belle of the ball. Really?
5. Lucille Ball, the weird face that launched a television empire. Today, Lucille Ball's face is one of the most recognizable in entertainment history. Her wide eyes, expressive mouth, and flaming red hair, instantly identifiable even to generations born long after her heyday. But when a young Lucy first arrived in Hollywood in the 1930s, that same distinctive appearance was considered a liability rather than an asset. They told me I had a weird face, with features that were too extreme for the camera, Ball recalled years later. One RKO executive said I had no real sex appeal and suggested I try being a secretary instead. These harsh assessments weren't isolated incidents. Throughout her early career, Ball was repeatedly told that her look was too unusual for mainstream success. Her large eyes, wide mouth, and angular features didn't conform to the delicate, symmetrical beauty standard epitomized by stars like Vivian Leigh or Lana Turner. Even worse, from the studio's perspective, was that her natural brown hair, photographed as a nondescript, mousy shade on black and white film. As a result, despite her obvious talent, Ball spent nearly 2 decades languishing in B-movies and secondary roles. RKO Pictures signed her, but rarely gave her opportunities beyond chorus girl parts or the other woman in romantic comedies, roles that minimized her distinctive looks and, crucially, provided little opportunity to showcase her extraordinary comic abilities. Not sexy enough for films, so she conquered comedy, observed entertainment journalist James Collins. Hollywood couldn't see past their narrow definition of feminine appeal to recognize the unique gift they had in Lucy. Ball's physical appearance, considered problematic for dramatic roles, included features that would prove perfect for comedy. The large, expressive eyes that could register shock or surprise, the wide mouth capable of everything from a dazzling smile to an exaggerated wail, the lithe, athletic body that could execute remarkable physical comedy. What the studios saw as flaws were actually the tools of her future trade. The pivotal transformation came when Ball finally dyed her hair the vibrant red shade that would become her trademark. Originally done for the film Du Barry Was a Lady, 1943, the color gave her an instantly distinctive look that set her apart from other actresses. Though still not considered conventionally beautiful by studio standards, she had found a visual signature that matched her unique comedic energy. Even with this metamorphosis, film success remained elusive. Ball was approaching 40, typically a death sentence for actresses in that era, when she and husband Desi Arnaz pitched the concept that would become I Love Lucy. Network executives were skeptical, particularly about Arnaz's Cuban accent and the couple's unconventional marriage, but it was Ball's appearance that drew some of the harshest criticism. CBS told us flat out that Lucy wasn't pretty enough to sustain audience interest as a lead, Arnaz revealed years after the show's success. They said viewers wouldn't believe someone who looked like her could be married to any man, let alone me. This devastating assessment would soon be exposed as one of the most short-sighted in entertainment history. When I Love Lucy premiered in 1951, audiences immediately connected with Ball's unique combination of beauty and comedic fearlessness. The very features that Hollywood had deemed too weird for film became beloved on the smaller screen, where her expressiveness registered perfectly in American living rooms. She became the most iconic face in TV history, noted television historian Thomas Halston. The supposed liability of her distinctive appearance became her greatest asset. Viewers could recognize Lucy from a single frame. That kind of visual signature is something most actors would kill for. What made Ball's triumph particularly sweet was how completely she leveraged the very qualities she had been told to suppress. Episodes frequently featured her making grotesque faces, disguising herself in outlandish ways, or engaging in physical comedy that less secure actresses would have rejected as unflattering. By embracing rather than hiding her distinctive appearance, she created some of television's most indelible moments. The ultimate vindication came through I Love Lucy's unprecedented success, reaching 67% of American television households at its peak and remaining popular in syndication for over 7 decades. The woman once dismissed as not pretty enough for films built a television empire, with Desilu Productions eventually producing many other classic shows before Ball sold it to Paramount for what would today be hundreds of millions of dollars. As Ball herself reflected later in life, "They told me I had a weird face and no sex appeal. I used that weird face to make people laugh for 50 years. Turns out being distinctive is a lot more valuable than being pretty." In defying Hollywood's limited vision of female appeal, Lucille Ball didn't just build a legendary career, she revolutionized comedy and business in an industry that had initially rejected her for the very qualities that would make her immortal.
The Viper's door. What then? Je bist Irisch hier. No, wo's denn? Shake it. Hab sich rein.
4. James Cagney. Too short, too tough. When James Cagney first set foot in Hollywood in the early 1930s, he was the antithesis of what studios considered leading man material. Standing just 5 feet 5 inches tall with a compact, muscular build, perpetually intense expression, and distinctly working-class New York accent, Cagney violated virtually every rule in the leading man playbook. The first studio executive who saw me test said I looked like a dock worker who'd wandered onto the lot by accident, Cagney later recalled. He told me I was too short, too rough-looking, and too ethnic for audiences to accept in romantic roles. These harsh assessments weren't without foundation by Hollywood's narrow standards of the era. Leading men were expected to be tall, conventionally handsome, and speak with refined diction. Cagney, with his street-tough demeanor and pugnacious energy, seemed destined for bit parts as thugs or comic relief, if he was to have any film career at all. Even his movement was considered problematic. Having trained as a dancer before turning to acting, Cagney had a distinctive, light-footed way of carrying himself that some executives feared would read as effeminate on screen, a serious concern in the hypermasculine film environment of the 1930s. They wouldn't give him a kiss, so he took the gun, observed film historian David Thompson, summarizing how Cagney's unconventional appearance ultimately pushed him toward the gangster roles that would make him famous. Warner Brothers essentially told him, "You'll never be a romantic lead, but maybe audiences will accept you as a criminal." This pigeonholing led to Cagney's breakthrough role in The Public Enemy, 1931, where his portrayal of gangster Tom Powers electrified audiences with its raw intensity. The famous grapefruit scene, where Cagney shoves a grapefruit half into Mae Clark's face, wasn't just shocking for its casual violence, It represented a complete inversion of the gallant leading man behavior audiences expected. What studio executives hadn't anticipated was how powerfully audiences would respond to Cagney's authentic energy. In an era of sometimes stilted performances, his naturalistic acting style and physical dynamism leapt off the screen. Women who were supposed to find him unappealing instead wrote passionate fan letters. Men who should have been intimidated by his tough guy persona instead identified with his underdog quality. Cagney connected with audiences on a visceral level that more conventionally handsome actors often couldn't achieve, explained film critic Roger Ebert years later. His supposed liabilities, the compact build, the staccato speech pattern, the coiled physical energy, became his most distinctive and appealing qualities. This unexpected popularity forced Warner Brothers to expand their vision of Cagney's potential. While he would continue to play gangsters and tough guys throughout much of his career, the studio gradually allowed him to showcase other facets of his talent, particularly in films like Yankee Doodle Dandy, 1942, where his dancing background and surprising vulnerability earned him an Academy Award. What makes Cagney's triumph over Hollywood's beauty standards particularly remarkable is that he never attempted to compensate for his unconventional appearance. Unlike some actors who might have tried to seem taller through camera tricks or adopted more refined speech patterns, Cagney leaned into his natural qualities, creating a screen persona that was defiantly authentic. "I never tried to be anything but what I am," he stated in a 1973 interview. "I figured if they didn't want someone who looked and sounded like me, they could hire someone else. Turns out there wasn't anyone else who could do what I did." This confidence translated to a screen presence that ultimately redefined leading man appeal. While Cagney rarely played conventional romantic heroes, his charisma was so powerful that it expanded Hollywood's understanding of male star quality. Audiences responded to his intensity, his intelligence, and his absolute authenticity, qualities that transcended traditional handsomeness. He became the ultimate gangster instead, noted director Martin Scorsese, who has frequently cited Cagney as an influence. But what's remarkable is how much humanity he brought to those roles. His characters might have been criminals, but audiences couldn't help rooting for him because his emotional truth was so compelling. By the time Cagney retired in the 1960s, with a brief return for Ragtime in 1981, he had appeared in more than 60 films and profoundly influenced generations of actors who followed. His career proved conclusively that distinctive character could triumph over conventional good looks, a lesson that would eventually open doors for unconventional stars from Dustin Hoffman to Joe Pesci. As director Milos Forman observed after working with Cagney on his final film, James taught Hollywood that authenticity is more compelling than beauty. A pretty face might catch your attention, but a real face tells a story you can't look away from.
I don't think you ever know anybody. Since we're never going to know you totally.
3. Katharine Hepburn. Too angular, too bold. When Katharine Hepburn arrived in Hollywood in 1932, she represented everything the studio system didn't know what to do with. Tall and angular, with sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, and an athletic build that defied the soft, curvy, feminine ideal of the era, Hepburn's physicality immediately marked her as an outlier in an industry with rigid beauty standards. "The first time I screen tested, the cinematographer asked if I could do something about my face," Hepburn later recalled with characteristic frankness. "When I asked what he meant, he said, 'It's all angles and bones. The camera likes softness in women.'" This wasn't an isolated criticism. Throughout her early career, Hepburn was described by various studio executives and critics as horse-faced, too masculine, and possessing features that were too harsh for audiences to accept as beautiful. Her distinctive speaking voice, cultured, slightly nasal, and unabashedly patrician, was deemed too shrill and lacking the breathy femininity considered essential for leading ladies. Even her body language defied convention. While most actresses of the era were coached to move with delicate, contained gestures, Hepburn strode confidently across sets, sat with her legs crossed like a man, and generally occupied physical space in ways considered unladylike by 1930s standards. They couldn't pretty her up, so she made fierce look fashionable, observed fashion historian Victoria Armstrong. Hepburn's refusal to soften her appearance or behavior essentially forced Hollywood to expand its definition of feminine appeal. This expansion didn't happen overnight. After initial success with Morning Glory, 1933, for which she won her first Academy Award, Hepburn experienced a series of commercial failures so significant that she was labeled box office poison in a 1938 industry survey. Many executives attributed this slump directly to her unconventional appearance and manner, suggesting audiences simply couldn't warm to a woman who defied traditional femininity so completely. Lesser talents might have surrendered to pressure, allowing the studio to soften their image or taking smaller, more conventional roles. Hepburn instead took control of her career in an unprecedented way, purchasing the rights to The Philadelphia Story as a vehicle for herself after a triumphant Broadway run. The film's success in 1940 revitalized her career and established the template for the strong, independent female characters she would portray throughout her career. What's remarkable about Hepburn's journey is how she transformed supposed liabilities into signature assets. Her angular features, initially considered too harsh for close-ups, became more striking and distinctive with age, giving her a timeless elegance that softer, more conventionally pretty actresses often couldn't maintain. The voice criticized as too shrill became one of cinema's most recognizable and imitated sounds. Catherine didn't just overcome Hollywood's beauty standards, she rewrote them, said her frequent co-star Spencer Tracy. She made them adjust the lighting to suit her face, rather than changing her face to suit their lighting. This refusal to conform extended to every aspect of her public presentation. At a time when actresses were expected to appear in full makeup and formal attire, even off-camera, Hepburn famously wore pants, minimal makeup, and practical clothing, choices that initially scandalized Hollywood but eventually influenced mainstream fashion and expanded options for women nationwide. Her independence extended to her career choices as well. Rather than accepting the diminished roles typically offered to actresses as they aged, Hepburn continued playing complex, romantic leads well into her 60s in films like Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, 1967, and The Lion in Winter, 1968, both of which earned her Academy Awards. By her final Oscar-winning performance in On Golden Pond, 1981, at age 74, she had completely redefined what a female star could look like, sound like, and be across an unprecedented span of decades. What Hepburn understood from the beginning was that distinctiveness outlasts conventional beauty, observed director George Cukor, who worked with her on many films. Pretty fades, but character endures. She bet her career on that insight, and history proved her right. By the time she died in 2003 at age 96, Hepburn had accumulated 4 Academy Awards, still a record for an actor, and created a body of work that demonstrated conclusively how an actress could succeed not despite unconventional looks, but because of them. Her angular features, athletic bearing, and distinctive voice, all initially deemed career obstacles, had become her most iconic and beloved characteristics. As she herself put it, with characteristic bluntness late in life, "They said my face was too strong, my voice too shrill, and my manner too bold. I said thank you for the compliments and kept right on going."
Dialogue with the songs from shows and work with actors, that was really...
2. Barbra Streisand, the nose that defied Hollywood. When a young Barbra Streisand first pursued a career in entertainment in the late 1950s, the feedback was immediate and brutal. Her nose would prevent her from ever becoming a star. With her distinctly Jewish features, unconventional facial structure, and that famous nose, slightly too long, slightly crooked, and decidedly non-button, Streisand represented everything Hollywood's beauty standards traditionally rejected. I had an agent actually tell me, "You need to get a nose job, change your name, and straighten your hair if you want any kind of career," Streisand revealed years later. He said, "No one who looks like you has ever been a star." This wasn't just one person's opinion. Throughout her early career, Streisand faced constant pressure to surgically alter her appearance. Producers, directors, and industry executives repeatedly assured her that her extraordinary vocal talent wouldn't be enough to overcome what they perceived as her physical shortcomings. The pressure was particularly intense because it came during an era when cosmetic surgery was becoming increasingly common in the entertainment industry. Many actresses with ethnic features had undergone procedures to create more standardized appearances. Jewish performers like Fanny Brice, whose life story Streisand would later portray in Funny Girl, had famously altered their names and noses to conform to mainstream expectations. Agents told her she'd never be a leading lady, noted entertainment journalist Barbara Walters, who interviewed Streisand multiple times throughout her career. The conventional wisdom was that audiences might accept her as a singer, or perhaps in comic supporting roles, but never as a romantic lead or serious dramatic actress. What made Streisand's situation unique was her absolute refusal to modify her appearance. Unlike many performers who reluctantly conformed to industry pressures, she made the radical decision to succeed on her own terms, with her own face. "If I was someone else, I wouldn't be me," she famously stated when asked about the pressure to get a nose job. "This is who I am." This steadfast position represented an enormous gamble in an era when beauty standards remained rigid. Even more remarkably, Streisand didn't just accept her distinctive features, she learned to use them to her advantage, developing a performance style and public image that highlighted rather than minimized her uniqueness. She kept the nose and became a legend, observed fashion photographer Richard Avedon, who shot many of Streisand's most iconic images. What Barbara understood intuitively was that distinction is more powerful than conventional beauty. In a sea of pretty, interchangeable faces, she was unforgettable. Her breakthrough came first in music, where her extraordinary voice gradually overshadowed concerns about her appearance. But even as her singing career flourished, Hollywood remained skeptical about her viability as an actress, particularly in leading roles. The turning point came when Streisand was cast in the Broadway production of Funny Girl in 1964. Playing Fanny Brice, another talented Jewish performer who had faced discrimination based on her looks, Streisand delivered a performance of such power that it silenced critics who had questioned her star potential. When the time came to adapt Funny Girl for film, however, the same old objections resurfaced. Studio executives pushed to cast a more conventionally attractive actress, arguing that Streisand's features would be too overwhelming on the big screen. It took the intervention of producer Ray Stark, Brice's son-in-law, to ensure that Streisand kept the role that seemed written for her. The result was one of the most triumphant film debuts in Hollywood history. Streisand's performance earned her the Academy Award for Best Actress, in a rare tie with Katharine Hepburn, and established her as a legitimate movie star despite every industry prediction to the contrary. What followed was a career that systematically dismantled Hollywood's beauty prejudices. Streisand didn't just succeed as a musical performer or in comedic roles, she established herself as a romantic lead in films like The Way We Were, a serious dramatic actress in projects like The Prince of Tides, and eventually as a groundbreaking female director at a time when that role remained largely closed to women. Her triumph wasn't just artistic but cultural, noted feminist critic Gloria Steinem. By refusing to erase her ethnicity or conform to narrow beauty standards, she expanded the public's vision of what a female star could look like. This expansion had implications far beyond Streisand's own career. Her success helped open doors for performers with distinctive looks, who might previously have been rejected based on appearance alone. Perhaps even more significantly, she provided a powerful example for ordinary women struggling with body image in a culture saturated with unattainable beauty standards. As Streisand herself reflected in a 2016 interview, "Maybe if I had gotten a nose job, I wouldn't have had the career I did. I might not have been able to express myself with the intensity I needed to. My nose wasn't conventionally beautiful, but it was mine. And in the end, that authenticity connected with people in a way perfect features might not have." In defying Hollywood's beauty dictates, Barbra Streisand didn't just build an unparalleled career spanning music, film, theater, and directing. She helped redefine cultural standards of beauty and challenged an industry built on conformity to recognize the power of authentic individuality.
Good evening, Mrs. Adams.
I think the door is unlocked. Your sister and her husband stopped by.
1. Bette Davis, the bug-eyed revolutionary. When 22-year-old Bette Davis arrived in Hollywood in 1930, studio executives took one look at her and saw disaster. With her enormous eyes, sharp features, and petite 5'3" frame, Davis violated virtually every beauty standard of the era. One executive famously dismissed her with the brutal assessment, "She looks like she's been hit in the face with a shovel." Studios hated her wide eyes and sharp features, recalled her longtime makeup artist Robert Miller. They said she looked like a bug and was unphotogenic in ways that couldn't be fixed with standard lighting and makeup techniques. This wasn't just casual cruelty, it reflected a genuine belief that Davis's distinctive appearance would prevent audiences from accepting her, particularly in romantic or glamorous roles. In an era when the soft, symmetrical beauty of stars like Greta Garbo and Joan Crawford defined the feminine ideal, Davis's intense, almost confrontational look seemed commercially unviable. Her first screen test for Universal Studios resulted in the casting director concluding, "We have enough fright-faced actors at Universal. We don't need any more." Even after being signed, Davis spent her early years relegated to unmemorable roles that the studio felt suited her unconventional appearance. When Jack Warner of Warner Brothers eventually signed her, it wasn't because he saw star potential, it was because she was available inexpensively after Universal declined to renew her contract. Warner initially viewed her as useful for secondary character roles, never as leading material. "They wanted a doll. They got a hurricane," observed film historian Molly Haskell. Davis's appearance, which seemed like such a liability, ultimately became her greatest asset because it matched her revolutionary approach to acting. Those eyes that executives complained about became the most expressive instruments in cinema. The turning point in Davis's relationship with her own distinctive looks came during the production of Human Bondage, 1934. Playing Mildred, an uncouth waitress who treats the film's protagonist cruelly, Davis made the then shocking decision to allow herself to look genuinely unattractive on screen. In the film's final scenes, as Mildred is dying of tuberculosis, Davis insisted on realistic makeup that showed the character's physical deterioration, a choice virtually unheard of for actresses in that era. "I was determined to look authentically ill and unattractive," Davis later wrote. "The male executives were horrified. They couldn't understand why any actress would willingly look ugly on screen. But I knew the performance required it. This willingness to subordinate vanity to artistic truth would become Davis's trademark. While other actresses fought for flattering lighting and advantageous camera angles, she regularly pushed to look worse if it served the character, whether aged and haggard in The Little Foxes or mentally unhinged in Whatever Happened to Baby Jane." What makes Davis's triumph over Hollywood's beauty standards particularly remarkable is how completely she inverted them. Rather than apologizing for her distinctive features or trying to minimize them, she magnified them. Those enormous eyes became even more expressive through her acting technique. The intensity that made executives uncomfortable became her signature quality. Bette didn't just overcome the industry's rejection of her appearance, she forced them to expand their definition of what a female star could look like, said director William Wyler, who worked with Davis on 3 of her most acclaimed films. She essentially told Hollywood, "This is my face, deal with it." And when they saw what she could do with that face, they had no choice but to surrender. This revolution wasn't without cost. Throughout her career, Davis battled studio executives who continued trying to conventionalize her appearance or limit her to roles they deemed suitable for her looks. Her willingness to fight these battles, sometimes walking off sets or taking studios to court, earned her a reputation as difficult, but also paved the way for greater artistic freedom for actresses who followed. What Davis understood was that distinctiveness is more powerful than conventional prettiness, observed actress Meryl Streep, who has often cited Davis as an influence. Those eyes that were initially considered too big became the most recognizable feature in Hollywood. You can identify Bette Davis from just her gaze. That's an asset beyond price for an actor. By the time Davis had established herself as one of cinema's greatest actresses, eventually earning 10 Academy Award nominations and 2 wins, she had completely rewritten the rules about female star appeal. Audiences didn't just accept her unconventional appearance, they became mesmerized by it precisely because it so perfectly complemented her intense performing style. Late in her career, Davis reflected on the initial rejection she'd faced with characteristic bluntness. Hollywood wanted pretty little dolls who could speak lines clearly and look decorative. I wasn't interested in being decorative. I wanted to crawl into a character and live there, and that requires a face capable of expressing everything, not just looking pretty. In defying Hollywood's limited vision of female beauty, Bette Davis didn't just build a legendary career, she revolutionized screen acting and expanded the very definition of star quality. Her triumph over the industry's initial rejection stands as the most complete and influential of all our countdown, a testament to the power of distinctive character over conventional attractiveness. As Davis herself famously declared, "I'd rather be considered too much than too little of anything." It was a philosophy that transformed not just her own career, but the possibilities for countless distinctive-looking performers who